Joining me now from the other side of the aisle is Republican Senator Kevin Cramer of North Dakota. Senator Cramer, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you. Thanks, Chuck.
Let me start with the Rittenhouse verdict. It's pretty divisive in this country. In some ways, you and I think Senator Tester share similar constituencies, and so I think you have a sense of maybe helping to explain the divide to urban and suburban America. But what was your reaction to the verdict, and why is he being hailed as a hero on the right?
Well, Chuck, I don't know that he's probably being held as a hero by some. I think largely what he's being held as an innocent person involved in this case. The symbolism that surrounded it, I think, is not reflective of the facts on the ground. I think, frankly, John Tester explained it pretty well. I mean, justice has been done by a jury of his peers, and I think, frankly, that when you look at the videotape, the videos and things that became more apparent later in the trial, you find a kid that was in the wrong place at the wrong time, should not have had a gun probably with him, but he didn't provoke what was happening to him. He responded in self-defense. I think people should be reminded that the people that he shot were also violent criminals and armed at that. It's not like he just snuck up on some guys. So the problem is, I think justice was done, but the rhetoric surrounding it probably on both sides is inappropriate to the actual event itself.
I want to read you something from conservative writer David French. And here's what he wrote about the incident earlier this week. He said, a political movement that turns a deadly and ineffective vigilante into a role model is a movement that is courting more violence and encouraging more young men to recklessly brandish weapons in dangerous places, and that will spill more blood in America's streets. He's not the only one concerned about this. Do you have concern that some people will get the wrong message from this verdict?
Well, what I get concerned about is a political movement that devalues police officers, that then cuts their funding, that makes them into the bad guys in keeping our streets safe and our communities safe. That kind of rhetoric, I'm afraid, leads to the very same violence that we're talking about. Now, a lot of people talk about having a discussion. The very first public event I had after I got to Congress was having a discussion around guns that included lots of people, including people of faith, people from schools, practitioners, pastors, and we don't do that anymore. And I agree that I think we need to have that discussion, but both sides need to want to have that discussion, not just use it for their own political gain.
The rise in open carry laws and in stand your ground laws, is it sending the wrong message of almost encouraging folks to use their weapon in public places?
No, I think it sends the message that you have a right to defend yourself against increasing violence. And again, let's get back to supporting our police officers. Let's get back to supporting solid laws that protect innocent people, so that innocent people don't feel like they have to always protect themselves. That said, they do have the right to defend themselves, especially in their own homes, which is largely what some of the laws you're talking about are about, particularly stand your ground.
Right, but the public spaces, do you think there's a point where this goes too far? Stand your ground at home, I think, is one thing. Stand your ground anywhere else in the community. It seems that expansiveness is what's got some folks troubled.
I don't know, Chuck. There are an awful lot of stories about people who are grateful that the person next to them at a public space was carrying when there wasn't anybody else there to protect them against another violent criminal. I don't think this is so much about guns as it is about the heart of people. There is no question that we are living at a time in our country where the Congress that you see that appears very divided is really a reflection of our communities that are very divided. So we all have a role to play in this. It's not just top down or just bottom up. We all have a role, and we ought to use our platforms to do that.
No, I say Congress is a mirror to society, and people need to see that. Speaking of attacks,
that's right.
You've been the subject of attacks from the former president for simply supporting a public works bill. On November 7th, the former president wrote, all Republicans who voted for Democrat longevity should be ashamed of themselves. On November 9th, he said, old crow Mitch McConnell voted for a terrible Democrat socialist infrastructure plan and induced others in his party to do likewise. And then finally on the 13th, rhinos, sellouts, and known losers. That's what Saving America needs to do by saving the GOP from. Would you have supported this bill if the vote had been in November instead of August?
I would have. Chuck, I happen to be the ranking member of the Transportation Infrastructure Subcommittee, so I helped write a good part of this bill. I was advocating for it long before Mitch McConnell announced his support for it, so he didn't induce me in any way. President Trump and I had a pretty healthy conversation about it after a previous national television appearance where I talked about the merits of the bill. Yeah, I would have. I don't make my decision on legislation based on whether it hurts or helps Donald Trump or whether it hurts or helps Joe Biden. Unfortunately, right now, there's a lot of the rhetoric is centered around, as much as anything, this gave Joe Biden a victory. Whether he gets a victory or not, I happen to believe that that every transaction in Washington, not every transaction in Washington requires a loser. And when North Dakotans can win, if Joe Biden looks good in the process, I'm more concerned about the North Dakotans.
Where are we headed if you do end up, you see what's going on in the House. They want retribution for people that voted for this bill. What happens to governing in America if essentially each party punishes anybody who votes with the other side?
Yeah, no, what happens is you're going to have a whole bunch of reconciliation bills if the same party has the White House, the House, and the Senate. And our founders created a fantastic, exceptional system of self-governance that works really, really well until it doesn't. So I do worry about that, Chuck. I think, frankly, that we need to think more strategically. Obviously, political adversaries are a means because our founders, again, created these three co-equal branches of bicameral legislature on purpose. Yeah. They did not want a king. They didn't want one party or one philosophy governing this country. So I do worry about that. I think the Senate has been pretty exceptional for the most part. But now we're getting forced with this crazy big government socialist agenda, driving up inflation and driving up our debt and our deficit coming at us by the Democratic Party that's gotten very comfortable with anti-Semitism and socialism. And that's a problem. We all need to get together again and have this conversation about what's good for America, not what's good for our tweets tomorrow.
Well, I see what you're worried about on the left. On the right, though, I think there's some folks that are worried that what you're seeing, that the fact that Paul Gosar, that Republicans didn't condemn it the way just 2 years ago Steve King would have been condemned. It looks as if it's being condoned. Bad look for the party?
I don't know. I think, Chuck, the problem is I don't think that was right. What Paul did probably wasn't right. I've never seen the meme myself. As you know, I did an op-ed criticizing Marjorie Taylor Greene. I've never met the woman, but her rhetoric early on, I just want to make sure that the party was distanced from that. But that said, at the same time, Ilhan Omar spews this gross anti-Semitic language, and she barely gets a slap on the wrist of that. Again, we have polarizing parties, at least parts of our parties that are so polarizing, and I think that there's a tendency to run to those corners rather than stand in the gap and have a better conversation and use our influence both ways. When you're sitting in a chair like I'm sitting, you can do one of two things. You can either yield to that or you can use your influence both ways. I try to listen as much as I can, engage people as much as I can, come on Meet the Press when others are afraid to, but then also, facilitate discussion.
Kevin Cramer, Republican from North Dakota, you do indeed accept our invitations. I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on and sharing your perspective.
My pleasure.
Sir.
Thanks.
You got it.
Thank you. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.